Welcome to a lecture on the geography and history of the Holy Land based on the syllabus for Catechist First Examination Handbook published by the National Catechetical Center. My name is Trevo Ludwayke and I will have a presentation on this topic, which is the first lesson in your handbook, and the first recording will take you through part 1 of lesson 1. That would be, and it will be followed by part 2 subsequently. So in part 1 of lesson 1, I will be talking about the various titles of the Holy Land, the geographical setting, the people of Israel, and finally the main geographical divisions of Holy Land. And the rest of the lesson you will find in part 2, which will be recorded separately. So let's start with part 1 of lesson 1. So various titles for the Holy Land. So there were various titles used to refer to what we call Holy Land. So we have 5 titles. One is Canaan. Second is Palestine. It was also called Israel. Biblically, it's called the Promised Land. And of course, finally, today, even tourists and so on, and all of us call it the Holy Land. So let's take them one by one and try to understand their significance and their geographical setting. Canaan, right. So if you look at this map over here, Canaan is situated between the Mediterranean Sea, as you can see here on my cursor, on the west. So Mediterranean Sea is here, and on the right it is bordered by this river Jordan. This is the river Jordan that is flowing down up here, right? River Jordan. And from the north it is actually bordered by Lebanon and Syria, which you can't see on this map, and in the south it is bordered by Egypt. So this is the area that we called Canaan, the Promised Land. But previously Canaan was not referred to this entire area. It was only referred to an area in Phoenicia. If you can see this here in this the arrow between Sidon and Tyre, this area was called Canaan, also bordering the Mediterranean Sea. How do we know that? And we also have in the Gospel of Matthew, for example, the faith of the Canaanite woman in chapter 15, verse 21. And Jesus went away from there and withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and was crying, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David, my daughter is severely oppressed by a demon." But he did not answer her word, we are told. But subsequently, because of her faith, the Canaanite woman kept arguing with the Lord, and the Lord anyway healed the son. But the important thing here to remember is that this lady or this woman was referred to as a Canaanite woman, because this happened also in the region of Tyre and Sidon, where Jesus was. So the Tyre and Sidon. So that time, this area was called Canaan, and not the entire area. Okay, what about the term Canaan? The name Canaan means the land that produces the purplish woolen cloth. So that was the ancient explanation for the word Canaan. It got its name owing to the blue oyster shell, which you can see here, the oyster shell, which produces a purplish dye that allows them to dye this woolen cloth, and therefore the word Canaan means actually the land that produces purplish woolen cloth. Biblically, Canaan is believed to be that Canaan is also believed that the land came to be known Canaan after the name of one of the grandsons of Noah, whose name was Canaan, and who had settled down in the area that would later become Israel, the territory God promised to the Jewish people. Let's have a look at this in scripture. So we have in Genesis chapter 10, verse 1, it says, "These are the descendants of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Children were born to them after the flood." Now the descendants of Ham are Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. Canaan was one of the sons of Ham. So one of the grandsons of Noah. So Canaan became the father of Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth. So the Canaanite tribes, such as the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Hivites, came from this stock of Ham, and from Canaan actually. So you see this in this graph as well, explaining the lineage of Noah's sons and grandsons, and Canaan is one of those whose name, after whose name the area was called Canaan, because he lived in that area. Okay, for coming further on, we come in the Genesis chapter 12. We are introduced to Abraham. So Abraham journeyed from Mesopotamia to Egypt and settled down in Canaan. Look at this map here. This is Mesopotamia, and we are told in the Bible that Abraham lived in the Ur of the Chaldeans, and when God called him to leave everything, leave his family, leave his land, and come to the promised land that he would show, and the promise he made that he would be a great nation, a father of a great nation, and Abraham, obedient to God's call, he moved from Ur of the Chaldeans, and he moves through Haran, across passing the river Euphrates, and then comes down to Shechem, Bethel, Hebron, Sodom, and Egypt. You find this already in the book of Genesis, all these areas where Abraham traveled, and then he goes back to Canaan. So that's one of the other reasons we identify Canaan with Abraham. Abraham settled down in Canaan. Okay, then from Abraham we go fast further down to the Exodus and the Numbers, and we find that after the people of Israel were liberated from Egypt under the leadership of Moses, and Moses took these people across the Red Sea and across the desert for 40 years, and they were supposed to enter the promised land, which was Canaan, which I have described to you in the first slide, that area. And Moses sent 12 spies to scout the land of Canaan before conquering it, because it was already occupied. Canaan was occupied by other tribes. So in order to conquer Canaan, Moses sent 12 spies, and we have that recorded in the book of Numbers, chapter 13, verse 2. "And Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. And from each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a leader among them, to scout the land." Which they did, and came back with news and so on, saying that they were big giant people, and it scared the people as well. But well, that's a nice story. You can read from chapter 13 of book of Numbers. Right, so Canaan, again, Moses also saw the land of Canaan, the promised land. He came to a point of where we call the Mount Nebo. He came up to Mount Nebo, and God decided that Moses will not enter the land of Canaan because of his disobedience to God's command, where he was asked to ask for water in the desert, and he tapped the rock, and in disobedience to God's command. So God punished him in a way and said, okay, you are not going to enter the land of Canaan. But God gave him the opportunity to see the promised land from Mount Nebo, which today is a tourist site. You see this in this picture here. This is the tourist site from which you will see. This is the land of Canaan that you see from a distance. And if tourists are taken up to this Mount Nebo here, where Moses is supposed to have stood and looked, and you can see the land of, the Holy Land from this place, even today. Right. The second title for Holy Land is Palestine. Now, why is it called Palestine? Palestine means the land of the Philistines. The Philistines was a tribe. And in 1200 BC, the Philistines from Crete invaded the land, and the land of Canaan was thereafter called Palestine. So they invaded Canaan in 1200 BC. And because of that, that area became to be known as Palestine. But it was not the Jews who called that area Palestine. It was the name given by the Romans. The Jews never used this name for this land because the Jews and the Philistines were arch enemies. We know that. And in the narration on the story of David and Goliath, the name Philistines is used. David is supposed to fight Goliath. Goliath was the giant sent by the Philistine armies to destroy the people of Israel, and David with his slingshot overcomes and kills Goliath and overcomes the Philistines' army, right? We know that from the book of Genesis, the story. Okay. And Palestine is also referred to in the Bible in various places. For example, in Genesis chapter 21, verse 34, we are told, and Abraham stayed in the land of Philistines for a long time. So it's referring to this land, to Canaan, where Abraham is supposed to have resided. As I told you, he moved from the Mesopotamia and came to Egypt, and from Egypt he went up to Canaan. So that area is called also Philistine area, land of the Philistines. In Exodus chapter 13, verse 17, when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine territory, though it was shorter. Why? Because they were enemies and they would have attacked the people of Israel. So they took a longer route, 40 years, that's why. 40 years in the desert to go to the promised land. They didn't want to go through this shorter route. Again in 1 Samuel chapter 6 verse 1, we are told, when the ark of the Lord had been in Philistine territory, actually in Canaan, 7 months, the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners and said, what shall we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us how we should send it back to its place. So the ark of the covenant was in the Philistine territory. The ark of the covenant was in Canaan. And the Philistines, when they invaded it, they didn't want the ark of the covenant to be with them. They were scared of it. And they wanted the priests and the diviners to get rid of it. And in 1 Samuel chapter 27 verse 7, we are told that David lived in Philistine territory 1 year and 4 months. And again in 2 Kings chapter 8 verse 2, the woman proceeded to do as the man of God said, that is Prophet Elisha. She and her family went away and stayed in the land of the Philistines 7 years. That is in Canaan again. Right. So Palestine is actually referring to Canaan in that time. The third title for Holy Land is Israel. Now the word Israel is, the etymology is Israel, means triumphant with God. And the term Israel was given, a name given by God to Jacob. We are told in the book of Genesis chapter 32 verse 28 that, a man came and wrestled with Jacob, and he's supposed to be God. In a human form came and wrestled with, or an angel came and wrestled with Jacob, and Jacob was able to prevail against that in that fight against that human person or whom God sent. So God gave Jacob the name because he prevailed against God. So the name Israel means triumphant with God. In recent times, however, the name Israel was used after Jordan separated from Palestine and became independent. You see Jordan here, Jordan, it's separated from Palestine, right? And it became independent. That was in 4th of May 1948, right? And in 1 Samuel chapter 13 verse 19, we are told, now there was no smith to be found throughout all the land of Israel, for the Philistines said, the Hebrews must not make swords or spears for themselves. So they again referring to the land of Israel, right? Land of Israel. Then in 2 Kings 5 verse 2, now bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. So another reference to that area being called Israel, Holy Land. In Ezekiel chapter 7 verse 2, Son of man, this is what the sovereign Lord says to the land of Israel, referring to the Holy Land. The end has come upon the four corners of the land. So that's the warning by the prophet Ezekiel, by God through prophet Ezekiel to the people of Israel who were very disobedient to God and unfaithful to God. In Ezekiel chapter 7 again verse 2, it is said, Son of man, this is what the sovereign Lord says to the land of Israel. Ezekiel chapter 21 verse 2 to 3. Again, Son of man, set your face against Jerusalem and preach against the sanctuary. Prophesy against the land of Israel and say to her, this is what the Lord says, and so on. So, referring to the Holy Land as Israel. Then in Matthew chapter 2, the Gospel Matthew, verses 20 to 22, it goes on and said, get up, take the child and his mother and go to the land of Israel, for those who were trying to take the child's life are dead. If you remember, this is the massacre of the innocents by King Herod when Jesus was born, and Joseph in a dream was warned by the angel to take the baby Jesus and flee to Egypt. And when Herod had died, once again in a dream, Joseph was told, get up, take the child and mother, go back to the land of Israel, to the Holy Land. Right? And they did so. Right. Another term for Holy Land is the Promised Land. Now this land was named the Promised Land because God had promised Abraham and his descendants that he would give them the land of Canaan as an eternal possession. Genesis chapter 17 verse 8 says, the whole land of Canaan, where you now reside as a foreigner, I will give as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you, and I will be their God. So the word Promised Land came to be known after the promise that God made to Abraham. Finally, the word that we use today, the word Holy Land, the word Holy Land, it actually is called Holy Land. Why? Because the Holy Land was the place where Jesus Christ, our Savior, was born. His birth took place, the birth of Jesus Christ. His public ministry, where he had his public ministry, where he suffered the passion, where he died and rose from the dead. This is called therefore Holy Land. We call it Holy Land because of these reasons, right? Okay. Let's move on. So you see the holy city of Jerusalem, a beautiful picture of the holy city of Jerusalem. Okay, let's get on to the geographical setting furthermore. And Israel is situated between Southwest Asia and North America. In the whole world map, if you look at the world map, Israel is here situated between the Southwest Asia and North America, right? Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I'm referring to this area here, right? Here. Okay. I think these arrows don't mean anything, right? Okay. Israel is situated between Lebanon, more closer, a kind of a zoom between Lebanon and Syria on the north, Jordan on the east, and Egypt on the south, as I told you earlier, right? So you can see that. This is the area. Okay. Yeah. So Israel is here. Then the Holy Land extends from Dan in the far north to Beersheba towards the south, spanning 150 miles. Remember this. It's 150 miles in length from the north Dan to the south Beersheba. Its breadth is approximately 50 to 60 miles across. The land consists of around 10,000 square miles and 4,000 square miles east and 6,000 square miles west of the River Jordan. Right? The current extent of the state of Israel is around 8,000 square miles. The Sea of Galilee, you can see the Sea of Galilee here, is 13 miles long from here to here, 13 miles long, and is 18 miles in breadth. It's a huge sea, therefore. It's a huge, although it's called a lake, it's a huge sea. 13 miles long, 84 miles in breadth. Wow. And it is situated 28 miles east of the Mediterranean Sea. 28 miles east of the Mediterranean Sea. Right. Let's talk about the people of Israel. Who are the Hebrews? They are called the Hebrews. The Israelites were originally called Hebrews. They were an ethnic group that founded Judaism. The tribe of pastoral nomads from Mesopotamia, and they spoke the language of Hebrew. Later they became known as Jews or Israelites. Okay, we call them Israelites. They became Jew or the Jews. The Jewish religion comes from that. The Jewish religion is practiced by the Jews. Okay, so the Hebrews, as they were known by their neighbors, were pastoral nomads who considered their neighbors to be enemies. They were always fighting against all these other tribes that were around them. Particularly because they were people who were worshipping one God, whereas the people right around them were worshipping various other things other than they were polytheistic, whereas the Hebrews were monotheistic. We will come to that later. Subsequently, they moved from pastoral activity to agricultural activity after settling down in Israel in particular, because Israel had that opportunity of agriculture more than pasture. So Israel is generally an arid land, therefore not much of pasture, which has 2 rainy seasons, and that gives the opportunity for agricultural activity. So this is not the kind of land that God promised Israel, because he promised a land filled with milk and honey, meaning prosperity and abundance. And yet this is what the land of the promised land is, and what the people of Israel are enjoying to this day. So you have a picture of people of Israel, some kind of a pastoral activity you'll find in these pictures, just for your information, for your edification. You'll find them the paddy fields and so on. Yeah. So the people of Israel were called Hebrews because the language they spoke was Hebrew, right? So if anyone asks, why were they called Hebrews? Very simply because they spoke the language, Hebrew language. And the word Hebrew means Passover. The word Hebrew in Hebrew means Passover. Abraham was once identified as a Hebrew. Way back in Genesis chapter 14 verse 13, it says, a man who had escaped came and reported this to Abram the Hebrew. So Abraham was identified as an Hebrew even at that time. So the term Hebrew has a wider meaning than the term Israel. They were all called Hebrews before the conquest of the land of Canaan, and were called Israelites afterwards. So before the conquest of Canaan, they were called Hebrews, but after the conquest and after they entered the promised land, they were called Israelites. The name Hebrews was used to refer to bandits originally, the word Hebrew. Therefore, the Bible does not use this word when referring to the Israelites, because Hebrew word also referred to bandits. When they talked about Hebrews, they were talking about bandits, referring to that at that time. So the Hebrews first appeared in Mesopotamia, that's where Abram was, and were known as Semites. Their languages were Aramaic and Hebrew. Aramaic was in fact the language of Jesus. Right? Jesus spoke Aramaic. They were monotheist, they believed in one God, hence they were different from other tribes and nations who were polytheists. These people were believing the one true God. Right? So you have a picture of some of the people of the Holy Land. You see them, different tribes. They belong to different professions, and it's some idea you get of who these people look like. Though today, of course, they also are westernized to some extent. Okay, so now we come up to the main geographical divisions of the Holy Land. The main geographical divisions are 3 divisions. Galilee, that's up here. Galilee is here. Upper Galilee is here. Samaria in the middle. Samaria and Judah. So these are the 3 main divisions of Holy Land. So the area east of River Jordan, so you get this River Jordan, and the east of River Jordan, this area was called Perea. This is called Perea. Right? And this side is called, of course, Holy Land, divided into 3, Galilee, Samaria and Judea. Okay, so we have Upper Galilee there, Samaria, the middle, and Judea. Okay, right, let's move on. And Perea is on the other side, on the east bank of Jordan. Now, Galilee talking about the first area. You see that area that you see there? Yeah. Galilee was a fertile land area where many useful crops grew. Galilee. Obviously because of the Sea of Galilee, area around Sea of Galilee, because it was a freshwater lake. We will talk about it later. And very, very useful for agricultural purpose, and lots of other crops grew there. And it was the most residential area in Palestine. The most residential area in Palestine was Galilee. And cultivation on the one hand and fishing, because of the lake Galilee, were the main occupation of the Galileans in that area. Then we come to the most important part in Galilee, and that is the Sea of Galilee, or the Lake Gennesaret as it was also called. Well, it was the place where Jesus first preached. His area of ministry, the early ministry of Jesus, was around the Sea of Galilee. We will see a little more on that further on. For example, now this particular picture was taken by me from the hill beside the Church of the Beatitudes, which is on the banks of the Sea of Galilee. So this was the area where Jesus is supposed to have preached the Sermon of the Mount, the Beatitudes in particular. And you will find the Beatitudes being displayed and the Church of the Beatitudes just behind where this photograph was taken. And overlook or far above, down there you see the Sea of Galilee. Okay, and this is another picture of the Sea of Galilee, situated 700 feet below sea level, about 13 miles long, as I told you, and about 165 to 230 feet in depth in certain areas. So it is a freshwater lake in Israel. It is the lowest freshwater lake on earth and the second lowest lake in the world, at levels between 215 meters and 209 meters below sea level, just for your information. But you need to remember the extent of the Sea of Galilee has been situated 700 feet below sea level, right? Okay, so there are, and if it is in meters, I think 215 meters and 209 meters, there are conflicting figures, but we'll go by this figure here, that it was 700 feet below sea level. Okay, the Sea of Galilee was also in the Old Testament called Sea of Kinneret, and you find that in the book of Numbers, chapter 34, verse 11, and it's called the Sea of Kinneret. And in the New Testament it was called the Lake Gennesaret, in Matthew chapter 14, verse 34, Mark chapter 6, verse 53, Luke chapter 5, verse 1. It is also called Sea of Tiberias. And in John chapter 6, verse 1, after this Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. So one side of the Sea of Galilee, in fact the west side of the Sea of Galilee, northwest like I think, was Tiberias, the city of the Tiberias, town of Tiberias. So it was called the Sea of Tiberias. The closest major city is Tiberias, which is along the lake's west edge. Okay. So the Sea of Galilee is the place where, as I told you, Jesus started his early ministry. So around the Sea of Galilee, there is the calling of the first four disciples were here. Healing of the leper, as given in Matthew chapter 8, verse 1. Commanding the wind in the storm, where the disciples were in the boat and there was a big storm and Jesus calmed the storm. And then appointed the 12 disciples. In Mark chapter 3, verse 13. Okay, the Sea of Galilee is mentioned 45 times in the four Gospels. 45 times the Sea of Galilee is mentioned, because of the importance of that area connected with the ministry of Jesus. The town close by the lake Gennesaret are Capernaum, which is on the kind of the northwest side of the Sea of Galilee. Bethsaida, which is more on the northeast or northeast of the Sea of Galilee. And then Magdala, that's where Mary of Magdala came from probably. Magdala also on the west of the Sea of Galilee, and of course Tiberias also on the west of Galilee. Then we come to the main cities and towns in Galilee, some of these important ones which you already talked about. Again, Capernaum is there, Bethsaida, Tiberias, Cana, Nazareth, Nain, Mount Tabor, and Caesarea Philippi is right up there, all around the Sea of Galilee here. This is this area, very important area. Now you find, the Sea of Jesus and the Sea of Galilee. You find so many things happening around this. The Sermon on the Mount, Peter's healing of Peter's mother-in-law, feeding of the 5,000, walking on the water, Beatitudes, as I told you earlier. Then healing men possessed with devils, and also drought of fishers, and where the disciples caught many fish, calming of the storm, and so on. Then we come to the next, earlier we were talking about Upper Galilee or Galilee, now we are talking about Samaria. Samaria is situated in the middle of the Israel, the Holy Land, and that is south of Galilee and north of Judea. It's a hilly area with fertile valleys, mostly immigrants from Asia Minor and descendants from descendants of the Jews actually. Right? And were not taken into exile by the Assyrians. The Samaritans were not taken into exile by the Assyrians. They remained and mixed with foreigners who conquered this area. Right? That is why they were not considered as pure Jews later on, after the return from the exile. So they were rejected by the Jews as foreigners because of their connections with the intermarriages with the foreigners and the Assyrians and so on. So they were not considered pure Jews, the Samaritans. And but Jesus accepted them, accepted by Jesus, and we have the good example of the parable of the Good Samaritan. Jesus talks about the parable of the Good Samaritan. So Jesus accepted them, although the other Jews, they did not, owing to this mix with other foreigners. We are also told in the Gospel of John about how Jesus at the well of Jacob with talking to the woman, a Samaritan woman, and the disciples were all surprised that he was doing so. That also happened in Samaria. So this is a picture of Jesus at the well with the Samaritan woman. Right. Now, what are the main cities and towns in Samaria? Sychar is one. Sychar is right in the center there. Shechem. Let me get back. Mount Gerizim, the River Jordan, and of course Qumran. This is where the Qumran scrolls were found. Over here, the Qumran scrolls on the Dead Sea, below the Dead Sea. So this area is all towns closer to Samaria. Right. See, accepted by Jesus, the parable of the Good Samaritan. Earlier I showed you the woman at the well. This is a picture of the Good Samaritan. And then we come to the third part, which is Judea. Judea is the north of Palestine. It's a hill country, north of Palestine, current Palestine. And Jerusalem, the heart of Judea. Jerusalem is the heart of Judea. Find Jerusalem. Where is Jerusalem? Here you are. This is Jerusalem in the heart of Judea. Right. This is Samaria. Can you see the difference in this color? Yeah. And religious and social life of Jews centered around Jerusalem. That's why the Jews, go up to Jerusalem to the temple, the Jewish temple at that time, an important part of their pilgrimage. So, the Judea was also the headquarters for the Roman governor after they conquered the Holy Land. The temple of Jerusalem was on top of a hill 2,400 feet above sea level. And during the Passover, Jews from all over Palestine came to worship here. Most Jews were returnees from Babylon in exile. They were in exile. They prided themselves as the chosen people of God, and despised other foreigners. They despised other foreigners, which was also a fact. Right. And they were rude in their speech. The Judeans were very rude in their speech, less tolerant than the Galileans. The Galileans were more friendly. And Jesus was not welcomed in Judea, as you know. He was rejected in Judea. And the temple of Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans. Here you find the destruction. And the remaining walls, this is the remaining walls of the temple. The remaining walls where the Jews now come and worship. This is only leftover of what? Of the temple, of this wall, of all this wall. This is all that was left over, and then people still go around to worship there. Okay. Now the temple in Jerusalem is the holiest place for the Jews, right? The main place, and then we have there the Holy of Holies, which is over here, and this area is not allowed for outsiders, for Jews. Only the priests enter this area. This is where Zachariah entered and was administering when he was approached by the angel to announce the birth of John the Baptist and so on. Yeah, the Holy of Holies. So, friends, this is the end of part 1 of lesson 1. So check out for the lecture on Geography and History of Holy Land, part 2, which is in the next recording.